good morning and welcome to the Breakfast Club. My name is Sizwakele Ndlovu and thank you for watching Asake Online. If you've watched any of the previous programs of the Breakfast Club, you'll know that we have interfaced with various vendors in and around Bulawayo, and there have been various concerns that have been raised repeatedly by vendors, licensing points, allocation of bays, and issues like that. So today on the program, we invited Mr. Shelton Sithole, who is the town planner for the Bulawayo City Council, to give us some information and shed some light on these and other issues. Welcome to the show, Mr. Sithole.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time out to be here.
Pleasure.
Mr. Sithole, straight to the business of the day. What I wanted to find out from you, there was an issue of Wuti bylaws. The Bulawayo bylaws were outdated, and I believe the SI was last updated in 1976. And then there's now this SI 181 of 2020. Please tell us more about that, how it changed. Did it change anything from the previous laws, and how this has affected especially the informal sector?
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. And maybe once again, may I appreciate the role that you guys are playing in terms of information dissemination in the city of Bulawayo. Yes, we had our bylaw, which was guiding the informal sector in Bulawayo, but it was last updated in 1976, and that's prior to independence. So as the city of Bulawayo, we then felt there was need, together with other informal traders association, including PVTA, Buta, Zichie, Simunye, we then felt that there was need that the bylaw could then be amended so that we remove what we saw as maybe colonial terms, colonial issues that were still in the bylaw, and then maybe also incorporate the views of the associations. So basically in terms of procedures, in terms of vending spaces, in terms of what we would call an informal trader, what we would call a vending bay, what we would term an association, what we would term a medical health officer, nothing has changed. But safe to say, maybe there is a much wider consultation base to say the base, they can only be identified through council in consultation with the traders themselves or with informal traders, something maybe which was not there in the previous SI. So yes, there is a new SI 181 of 2020, but also because of COVID-19, one would feel also it has been overtaken by a lot of events. So what would then need is to review based on this factor, that is the shock that has happened, that is the pandemic, and see how best we can also, because a lot of things have changed. You would have a lot of people, the vendors and workers, now they have changed in terms of definition as well. Now you see a lot of push carts in the streets. So now we have to align the SI again based on that. But what we would want to appreciate is that there is now a common ground between the local authority and the Informal Traders Association. So it's easy now to identify issues, talk to issues, review them, pass them with council, and then we work hand in hand. So basically nothing much has changed. The new SI, it still speaks to marketplaces, it still speaks to the local planning authority as the one that must maybe allocate space in terms of through its statutory plans, your master plan, your local plan, your layout plans, to say we need to have these spaces incorporated into these statutory plans. Still speaks to traders trading on designated sites, traders having the medical health certificate for the better or for the protection of the Bulawayo's residents. So, and also maybe finally it speaks to the offenses and penalties. Of course, it should one not follow what is stipulated in the SI or in the bylaws. So the last issue there speaks to offenses and penalties, but basically nothing much has changed, save to the colonial issues that have been removed from the bylaw.
Okay. So, what would be the one physical issue that we'll say ESILA has addressed, that we can say, okay, I understand you're saying basically most of it has been kept in place, but what was the one thing that we can say, okay, this I has changed this in the sector?
The consultation, yeah, where the prior to 1980, it would give all the powers to the local authority and through its various departments. But now the new SI then speaks to consultation with informal traders. So it's not an issue of us identifying spaces, but it's an issue of going to the ground, talking to the associations, talking to the traders. What sort of spaces would you want? And then I think to me that's the measure which was not there, because we're now saying we're moving into the new agenda of consulting before. So it should be for them, by them, and then at the end of the day, it's for the whole city. So that's the major change that I can speak of in terms of the new SI.
Okay, so now it's a collaborative effort. Udala council said this, and you had to fall in line.
Yes.
But now you're having a dialogue about
dialogue, yes.
Okay. Has there been any progress made in actually getting more bays in town and in the different areas, Amalogicini and things like that?
So I think one critical thing that you mentioned is that the demand is higher now, and maybe the supply is trying to meet up with that demand. But I think it's very critical that we look at the background of that. The historical context of that is that a lot of people are now being pushed into informality. Our economy is not favorable. It's chasing a lot of people into informality. But whilst we're still trying to deal with that, then came the pandemic. So during the pandemic, more people were even then pushed to informal trading. Many people lost their jobs, and the only easy entrance will be the informal economy. So yes, now we've got a demand maybe exceeding what the city could supply. So I think that's the first issue that we must understand that. But on top of that, there is the issue of the users of the space, that is the users of the land. So land is used by many users. There are quite a number of them. Let's go to the CPT of Bulawayo, for example. Yes, we've got those designated spaces for informal traders. But now maybe you find people in the pavements, in the service lanes. All those, maybe according to council and according to the general public, a pedestrian, they want to access the city without any disturbance. Cyclists, they would want to access the city without any disturbance. And then vendors, they also want their space. But there is the former traders again. In front of their shops, they don't want to be disturbed. So town planning has to balance amongst those needs by various users. But yes, to come maybe to the question that as the local authority, we then felt, because some of the spaces, because of the prior SI, some of the spaces were then maybe identified by officers alone. But what we are now saying is, now that we are pushing the consultative type of an agenda, yes, we now allow vendors, we now allow traders, we now allow associations. Should there be a space that they feel it's being underutilized, and then if it's permissible, if it's statutorily, if it's permissible, we then say, is it possible that we can do maybe a change of use of that particular space, or change of reservation if it's vacant land? So yes, now what we have done, for example, if we go to Nkulumane Sizwakele, Nkulumane Sizwakele, there is some space where it's earmarked to put wholesale, both wholesale and retail. So close by there is some retailers, but just next to it we're putting some wholesale space with the BVT Aid, Danish Church Aid, and other partners. So that's a space that maybe traders themselves then identified and started trading from there. But then as the local authority, we then looked at the feasibility. Is it feasible for us to allocate to put it for informal traders. So yes, that's one space. So we not only that, but quite a number of them in the city. So the progress there, it's quite a Nkulumane Sexile, it's our success story. Yes, we've got other spaces in Country Park, and we've got other spaces again dotted around the western suburbs. And the western suburbs, that's where we would get our high demand in terms of spaces. Yes, so there is much progress, but not the progress that one would expect, maybe because of the COVID. Because COVID affected a lot of issues. We had to change our way of doing things. We had to change how we meet, because we initially had said we're going to meet with informal traders once a month, physical meetings. But then if you move to virtual meetings, number of them won't afford. So we're trying to balance, but there is progress on that aspect.
Coming back to the vendors, one of the issues that has been raised consistently is the issue of licensing points. They have to come to town to hand in their licenses, check for paper and all that. Some from as far as Pumula, transport is an issue. And what is being done to decentralize the licensing of vendors and hawkers?
Yeah, so the plans that we're talking about, the plans prior to the pandemic, we had said, let's decentralize. And decentralization in this case was conclusive. It was inclusive of everything. And the hope was that all the sectors were then going to adopt to that type of a strategy. So the decentralization strategy was saying, let's decentralize wholesale spaces, let's decentralize retail spaces, let's also decentralize license and payment offices. But now, of course, because of COVID-19, we are still maybe trying to see how feasible is it. But we didn't sit down as the local authority now that there's COVID-19. What we then did was how best can we address the concerns of the informal traders, part of which included us bringing in issues to do with e-payments, where our vendors, where our traders are now able to pay their monthly or their yearly licenses using EcoCash, using other payment methods. And then all that is then, there is no need for the vendor to go physically to the offices. Secondly, we've then said those of us that do not have maybe these means of payment, e-payments, what we've done, we've empowered the site committees. So the site committees now, you get them empowered in the sense that they deal with issues that affect the traders. They bring them into the offices, but not only so, we've also said your treasurers of the treasury of the associations, they are now able, because there's no need for all of you to go in queue only to get your receipt and your license stamped. So the treasurers now, they are the ones that now bring the few that are now paying in cash, or the few that are now paying in other methods that would require someone going straight to physically to the offices. So we've that sort of a package where we're saying, should times permit, yes, we're going to be opening, but also the opening of the offices will be based on demand. Which places need offices? Because maybe feasible, it doesn't make sense to economically to put just for 2 or 3 people that, because most of them we discover that they do their trade, they do their they buy their goods in the city, in the CPT, and then once we decentralize, it means they are going to be buying from these spaces like your Nkulumane Sexile. So Nkulumane Sexile will be a priority in terms of license spaces. So that's the package. Yes, we are moving on. The idea also is to incorporate issues to do with technology. Your GIS, as you know, that we want to be a smart city by 2024. And smart, we are saying, how do we incorporate technology in making the daily endeavors of the informal traders easy and not strenuous? So what we're doing as the city, we're then saying, looking at technology, we're going to be using GIS. their pays are now going to be linked to their accounts. Something maybe I think we're going to be the first on that aspect, something that is not there even in Zimbabwe. So your pay is linked to your account, and then there is also that sort of security in terms of our informal traders. So that's the package. But allow me to say the external shocks, they affect the plans, but we don't sit down. We are the planners. We need to plan given any external shock. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe back to that point of setting up spaces. How feasible would it be to have people, we've got the localized municipal offices anyway. So would it be a burden to actually have those types of payments being made where there are already centers like that, or is there a need for separate spaces or setting up of different structures, because we already have all those
Our
places where we
housing
go,
offices.
our housing office, yes,
Yeah.
we're already set up
Yeah.
in all these different suburbs. Can payment not be channeled towards already existing administration points like that?
So it's in terms of that, looking at that, it's not difficult. But is it every housing office, is it every administrative place that would require an informal trader or informal trading officer? So you get that some of the spaces, in as much as we have got vendors in the shopping centers, in the designated spaces, but most of them, they are now into e-payments. But your places like Nkulumane and Country Park, now those are the spaces where you get a lot of maybe outcry from the vendors to say, can you set up these spaces here? But other spaces, other housing offices or administrative points, there isn't much demand to a point that maybe we can then say, let's put an officer there. But once there's demand, the local authority is prepared to put officers there. But we are saying we want to look at the feasibility in terms of how is it economic, so that we don't set up a place where only an officer would just attend to one or two. Or what we could do then, maybe we could think about merging these issues with other departments that are functioning from these administrative points. So yes, it's something that the local authority is thinking about. And once we are fully fledged, once we know how to live with COVID-19, then it will be easy for us to say, what do we do? But in consultation with the traders themselves.
Okay, I've got an interesting question. Well, interesting to me, because for me, I thought it would just be a process of, here are my papers, I've got my form, I'm just going to make a payment like any other person. Like maybe if I'm doing water, then I just hand you my money. Maybe a bit of just a quick summary of the actual process for it to justify a specific officer, because I just thought it was papers, Papa. There you go. And so what happens behind the scenes?
So the ideal setup would be a setup that updates instantly, automatically updates itself to say Sithole has paid. It records in terms of their rentals, their licenses, and it also, but now it requires the license itself. Our health department and our town planning department must look at the license and renew, maybe by way of stamping, to say this is going to cover you for the next 1 year. But as we've said, the idea is to go to a sort of an automated setup, which doesn't require the physical licenses to be brought and be stamped and to be taken to another department. So that then complicates. So you don't only have to, one way or the other, it has to find its way to the health department or to the town planning department.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it's not only in the administrative. So once we think of that, we now need to make sure that our health officers are also there, our town planners are also, or our clerks are there to record all these things. So the idea is to make it automated.
Oh, I see.
So that's the complication.
All right, so it goes from department to department.
Yes.
And all right, so the system is not just,
it's not
clear cut.
Yeah.
Okay, based on the certain health requirements as well that need to be checked. And all right, if you're selling food, you need a certificate.
Yes.
All right, no,
Yes, now.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
Mr. Sithole, we have seen repeated issues with confiscations. About vendors, Gijima, city council trucks are out confiscating push cars, confiscating produce. Why are we having issues like this, and what is the possible solution? You did mention that more and more people have been pushed into informal trading, and jobs have been lost, and everybody, well, not everybody, more and more people are being forced to go into the informal sector. It seems rather heartless of the city fathers to keep on confiscating over and over, especially in light of what we're going through now. Why is this happening, and is there an amicable solution going forward?
It's never easy, especially in the times that we find ourselves in. But I mentioned earlier on that the city has got different users. So a lot of people come to the local authority and make their complaints, including the vendors, including the formal traders. So formal traders, one would go and set up in front of one's shop. That person comes to the town planning department or to the city to say, we've got a challenge here. Now we have to look at our SIs, our bylaws, to say this person that we're talking about, are they in designated places? So quite a number of times when we've met in these platforms for dialogues with associations, one question that we've always asked is confiscation of goods happening to those that are on designated sites? Because at the end of the day, we'll be killing the whole idea of having these bylaws, of having a local authority being the planning authority of the city, and also agreeing that there are quite a number of users in the city. So in most cases, more often than not, you find that those whose goods are being confiscated are those that are trading from illegal sites. And illegal sites in this case being your pavement, your street pavement, where you and I would want to walk to do our shopping in the street. Those that are confiscated are those that set themselves up maybe in some road intersections, which is not safe. You and I, we talk of our Bulawayo, the Bulawayo that we want, the Bulawayo that we know of. The Bulawayo that we want, the Bulawayo that we know of, it's an orderly Bulawayo. The Bulawayo that has been getting accolades, it's the Bulawayo that has been clean. It's the Bulawayo that is aesthetically pleasing. It's the Bulawayo that has brought convenience to its users. It's the Bulawayo that has brought safety to all the users of the city. So once it's a free for all, it then defeats the whole idea of having a local planning authority. And even the other day we're asking ourselves with associations to say, what happens if one person whose goods are confiscated is someone who is illegal, but it's someone that is registered with you? So the question we posed it to the associations to say, and then the associations, clearly they said, our duty is to advise people that there is a local planning authority, there are designated spaces. The fact that you haven't found the space doesn't give you the right to go and occupy. Otherwise, it will be a disorderly city. There are some streets now that are starting to be inaccessible, ungovernable, and not safe for you. In Bulawayo, we would want a kind of a setup where there is a street where people feel we don't get to that street. So the Bulawayo that we have always admired, the Bulawayo that our forefathers have always given, inherited us, is the Bulawayo that has order. Yes, we need to strike a balance, but it cannot be a one-night event. It's a process. Let's accept that there are a lot of issues and a lot of stakeholders. Now what we've done, we've got what we call the Bulawayo Working Group. The Bulawayo Working Group, it's a combination of council, all its 8 departments, and all the associations, informal traders associations, and the Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises, which is the national government. So the solution can never be a council solution, can never be an individual solution. It needs all the stakeholders to come together. The government, it must play its part so that there is employment. People, they find a right to, they find some reason to go and get into the formal economy. Recently, we conducted a research in the streets of Bulawayo. If I'm not mistaken, 60% of those that are trading in the streets are graduates. And when we were checking every year, Zimbabwe is producing 30,000 graduates. And these are not absorbed into the formal system. These are finding their way into the informal. Now the dilemma comes to the local level, which is the city. So what we're doing, part of the dialogue, once we have that social dialogue, those platforms to say what can be done. But land, it's never elastic, it's inelastic. Land, the land that we used to have in 1980 is the land that we still have today. But the demand is high. So what we have done, for example, when it comes to residential, we've said, let's densify. Now, as the town planning department, we are looking into issues of densification within the informal trading. You look at your Bulawayo small and medium enterprise workshop, which is being launched, which was launched yesterday. It's a type of a setup where we say, how can different stakeholders come into play? The private, those that are owning the spaces in the industries, the shop owners, the local authority with the land, the government. How do we come together to say, to accommodate as much people as possible? So you'd find in the Bulawayo SMEs, you now have a ILO coming in to build some nice convenient spaces in a property that is privately owned. So those are part of the solutions that the city is saying. Even in the industries, do we have spaces which can accommodate a number of people in one building, those that can live together, that can coexist, and we put them there, and then we then reduce the waiting list of in terms of formal trading spaces. So the town planning, it's coming into its agenda to say, we're not going to say there are a lot of changes in the system. We are going to say what then can be done. And part of it involves issues to do with densification, issues to do with collaborations with other stakeholders, your government, your private players, and the city. So yes, those are the things that we are trying to do as the local authority. And I'm happy it's already it's producing marvelous results, because you've got a space now that is being built in Sizwakele, which is going to accommodate over 20 wholesale traders, which is going to attract, again, quite a number of retailers and decongest the city. So the idea is to be inclusive in terms of consultation. But we're saying, once the local authority, once the spaces are decentralized into Kulumane, do I and yourself need only to buy fruits and vegetables? No. I need to deal with issues to do with banking. So we're saying our banks as well must decentralize. Your Econet must decentralize. In a COVID-19 operative environment, we'd want to find a situation where people still queue in the core CBD just to access or just to fix issues to do with their lines. But we're saying, Econet, let's take these things to the SEPAPs. Banks, let's take the banking services to the SEPAPs. Then one would find a reason to go to Nkulumane. But if the only reason that takes me to Nkulumane is to go and get fruits and vegetables, I would choose the CPT because I can also get fruits and vegetables. Okay. Yeah.
So it's a collective effort, because I remember there were all these beautiful malls, like in Tumban and in Nkulumane, and once upon a time, there was that ease of just being close to your neighborhoods, but for whatever reasons that we might have to discuss at some other point, you find that those centers died down. Well, not didn't die down, but then some of the essential service that I would access in town, exactly what you're saying, were not available. So then I would bypass, because I can't make two stops.
Yes.
So I'll do this here and then I'll proceed to town. So it's a collective effort on business, stakeholders, everybody, the informal sector, to actually say, let's decentralize.
Yes.
And it's not just the vending. You've put it across Very, very clearly.
Yeah.
And it makes sense on paper.
Yeah.
But I'll go back to the confiscation.
Yeah.
Are people aware? We know what is supposed to happen. Is this man pushing his pushcart away if he is not part of any of the informal trading associations? What happens if he's genuinely not aware that he is breaking a law? All he knows is that I need to put bread on the table. I need to have his twala ntambama. What happens in the case of that? Is there a system of warning people? Is there a system of educating before we actually go to taking the little livelihood that they have? Is there a megaphone person to please get off this pavement, clear off? I don't know. I understand totally what you're saying about maintaining our city. And at the same time, is there a way of balancing it, checks and saying, look, we've warned you enough times? Do they get warnings? What happens in the information dissemination part of that to say you are doing something wrong?
Yeah, so that I don't sound like I avoided the question of confiscation of goods. So to us as the local authority, only those goods, only those traders that are operating from illegal, undesignated, then they are going to have their goods confiscated. Now, the next question is, are they aware? 2 weeks ago, we gathered with all the stakeholders that I mentioned earlier on to say, to prepare what we're going to be calling the Bulawayo Informal Economy Enhancement Strategic Plan. So this plan is saying, for the next 5 years, we did a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of the local authority? Yes, we've gotten so many accolades, but what are the weaknesses? We've done a self-introspection, not only us, but the associations themselves, to say what are the issues that we must deal with. And part of it includes what you have mentioned, information dissemination. But before we get there, we're then saying we're going to be advising everyone at least to belong to some association. And I think this is something that was raised in a meeting with the Minister of State. We don't want as many associations as they can be, but we're saying let's have the minimum number of associations to bring order into Bulawayo. But those associations now, how do we, in the working group, what is the role of the working group? The role of the working group is information dissemination and awareness, education. But for now, we rely on our corporate communications section in the city, where time and again they use these various platforms. But come 2022 in January, we're going to be using our Masia Pambili article, media like yourselves, our associations. So we want to bring a sort of a platform where we disseminate information, but also a platform where we discuss. And if you check the full council, it's covered by maybe yourselves, and people are aware of what's happening. Is there possibility of us in these platforms to have platforms which can be aired live, be it on site, on Sky's Metro, in the local issues of the newspapers? So that's the idea that we're going into. But we can only get these concerns if we sit down and talk. It's a pity that all what is happening in the streets is affecting me and you. It's affecting our livelihoods. But also the concern is coming from me and you again. The shop owners, the pedestrians, people, they've got this tendency of comparing cities. And they would say, we don't want to be city A. We want to remain as Bulawayo. So how do we avoid finding ourselves being city A, being a disorderly city, being a city where everyone can do anything, where people can dump things? So the pushcart vendor down there, we've got a platform now where we link the vendors with your Pepsi, with your Delta, with your Dairy Boat, with your Cortina. So these ones, as the major producers, the major suppliers of these products, we now have a platform as the local authority where we meet them, and then they tell us their challenges, but they also share the opportunities that are there in the streets. Like, for example, 5 years ago, you wouldn't find any pushcart in the streets of Bulawayo. But because of these conversations, you now find a Pepsi pushcart, but not in the core CPD, because you would say, I don't want to find next to a bank, next to this office, I don't want this type of inconvenience. But we're saying informal traders will then say, we want to be put in spaces that draw a lot of human traffic. And these will be your bus terminals. These will be your market spaces. So strategically, as the town planning and other sections and other departments in the local authority, that's where we now put all these informal traders. So the confiscation of goods, we want to avoid it as much as possible, but the balance now, all the users, the space is contested. And we are finding some time to say, how are we going to balance this? But as we have said, it's not a once-off thing. It's not an event, it's a process. It can never be done by an individual. It needs all of us, including the media as well. So we're going to be using these platforms to say which spaces are designated, which spaces are not. So yes, that's the whole idea. Yes.
Mr. Sithole, thank you so much for a very informative discussion. And you've answered quite a few questions. I've always wanted things like that. And people will ask us, our viewers will ask us, yes, you've chatted to this vendor, what is being done? And I think you've summarized it in a very clear way to say, look, it's a process. And there are various stakeholders. Everybody has to play their part. And the fact that this thing of balance, sometimes we overlook it. I'm like, okay, here's this poor man who's lost his pushcart. But then also there's a formal business that needs access, that needs to be accessed by all its clientele. And now if you've blocked the whole pavement and people start shunning the business, it therefore affects somebody else who's also paid his rates and his licensing and is in it for profit as well. So that balance has to be maintained. And I like what you said about saying, okay, we're far better off than city XYZ, but they probably started off through the same processes. And at some point, it wasn't checked. That's why it then becomes an unmanageable issue.
Yeah. Maybe I also look at the chaos that is now in some of the streets of Bulawayo.
Yes.
You get your formal trader who has a shop, but now they hire someone to go and sell from the pavement. The products that are in the shop. Because they are saying, people are coming to sell in front of my shops. So now they hire someone those that are going to get into the shop, fair enough, but they are then hiring someone to sell from the pavement. The research it was a conclusive research. And also the spaces, your service lanes. The service lanes, as the town planning will say, we have got lanes in the city of Bulawayo that must be used by your refuse collection trucks. But you find now people closing off those service lanes, dumping if you check some of the service lanes now, they are inaccessible. And already it's an eyesore. And also you get people now who start to because a site, it's just not a site, but it comes with complementary services. Your ablution facilities. Where are these people relieving themselves? Where are they finding convenience, issues to do with convenience? You find that they now use these service lanes. But is that the city that we want? So the balance, people have to look at from that perspective. But I appreciate people have to be taught these things. Because we don't want our service lanes, we don't want people selling things from the service lanes. But we want the service lanes, also those things were deliberately designed, issues to do with fire, issues to do with now you find people loading and offloading from the streets, bringing issues to do with safety. But we've said all those were done so that people can load and offload in their convenient times somewhere which doesn't affect traffic. Yes. Check those streets that now have got that type of a chaos. Those are the streets now that are starting to sound like city A in terms of congestion. You get a lot of traffic congestion. All that congestion is caused by inconveniences in the service lanes, inconveniences in the parking spaces. Now it's delaying the traffic, and very soon your 4th Street, your Herbert Chitepo, they are starting now to sound like foreign streets in the city of Bulawayo. But once you bring that balance, you would find that it will take us ages to talk of a congested Bulawayo. So those are the issues that town planning and the city of Bulawayo is faced with. But we're equal to the task. We've got young and motivated staff to look at those issues. Now we've got our drone to say, how do we get the data in the streets? How do we work with that data? And it's sent to relevant departments for decision making. But also, let me appreciate the role that you guys are playing, the role that the Informal Traders Association are now, they are sound. They are not there just to be in it, but they are there for the city of Bulawayo. It's one thing that we appreciate with the Bulawayo Vendors Traders Association, with the Bulawayo Upcoming Traders Association, with your Zichie, your Highlanders Association, your Simunye. These people, before anything else, they say, is the Bulawayo that we have, the Bulawayo that our forefathers gave to us? And is it the Bulawayo that we want to see in 20 years? And that is very important to us. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're going to be having more platforms in the coming years. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole. And thank you so much for watching The Breakfast Club. I've been chatting to Mr. Shelton Sithole, and he's the town planner from the Bulawayo City Council. We've had a very informative discussion on vendors, vendor issues, vendor grievances, and the general cleanliness of our city of Bulawayo. This is not the last conversation we're going to be having. We are going to be engaging our city fathers, and thank you so much for taking the time out again, Mr. Sithole.
Thank you.
We look forward to finding out more, like as you progress, to update our viewers on what is going on in the city of Bulawayo. As I mentioned, this is Asake Online, and thank you so much for watching The Breakfast Club. My name is Sizwakele Ndlovu, and we'll meet you in other programs. Bye for now.